The gray November sky over Spokane Valley hung heavy with leaden clouds, as if nature itself were mourning along with the few people gathered at the cemetery. A cool wind blew the last fallen leaves from the trees, swirling them in the air and tossing them at the feet of the mourners. The center of attention was Hunter Knights, a tall, 40-year-old man with a clean-shaven face and impeccably styled hair. His expensive black suit contrasted with his earthen complexion, and his eyes, dry and empty, stared somewhere through the crowd. Next to him, an elderly woman was quietly sobbing, Chloe's mother, who had lost her only daughter. The priest spoke the last words over the coffin. Chloe Knights, 35 years old, had died unexpectedly. Acute heart failure, the doctor said. Too young for such a diagnosis, whispered acquaintances behind Hunter's back. Too sudden not to raise questions. At the edge of the cemetery, hidden behind a wide oak tree, stood a man in his 30s. His dark skin blended with the shadows of the tree, but his eyes were fixed on the ceremony. He clutched a bouquet of white lilies, Chloe's favorite flowers, in his hand. When the last handful of earth fell on the coffin lid, the man turned and walked quickly to a truck parked nearby with the logo of a hardware store. 20 miles from the cemetery, in the homicide division of the Spokane Valley Police Department, Detective Nina Grace was finishing her report on a previous case. The 45-year-old woman with short curly hair and tired eyes stretched in her chair, working out her stiff back. 20 years on the force had taught her a lot, but it hadn't freed her from paperwork. A phone call broke the silence in the office. "Detective Grace," she answered, pressing the receiver to her shoulder and continuing to type. "We have a murder on River Street, number 34. The dispatcher's voice sounded mundane, as if he were reporting a parking violation. "The victim is Hunter Knights, male, 40 years old." Nina's fingers froze over the keyboard. "Knights? Isn't that the guy whose wife was buried today?" "That's the one. He was found by a neighbor about an hour ago." Nina turned off her computer and threw on her coat. "I'm on my way." The Knights' house was typical of the neighborhood, a 2-story structure with a neatly trimmed lawn and a white picket fence. The only things that stood out from the idyllic picture were the police cars at the entrance and the yellow tape cordoning off the area from curious onlookers. Nina showed her badge to the officer at the entrance and entered the house. The metallic smell of blood mixed with something chemical, probably air freshener, hit her nose. The contrast between the immaculate house and the chaos in the living room was striking. Hunter Knights lay on his back in the middle of the room. His white shirt, the same one he had worn at his wife's funeral, was a bloody mess. The medical examiner, who was leaning over the body, looked up when Nina entered. "Multiple stab wounds," he said without waiting for a question. "I've counted 9 so far. Death occurred between 9 and 11 p.m. Nina nodded and looked around. The living room looked as if a serious struggle had taken place there. An overturned armchair, a broken vase, shards of glass from photo frames. "What does the neighbor who found the body say?" she asked the young police officer who was taking notes in his notebook. "Harold Wilkins lives across the street. He heard a loud argument and the sound of breaking glass last night, but didn't think anything of it. This morning he noticed that the Knight's mailbox was overflowing and decided to check if everything was all right. The door was unlocked. Did anyone see any strangers last night?" Mrs. Johnson, the neighbor on the left, claims she saw a Builder's Depot truck parked nearby around 8 o'clock. Nina frowned, making a mental note. She needed to talk to Mrs. Johnson in person. "Is there a security system here? Cameras?" "Just a dummy on the front," the cop replied. "It appears there is no real security system in the house." Technicians in white coveralls methodically processed the surfaces for fingerprints and other clues. One of them beckoned to Nina. "Detective, take a look at this." On the table by the entrance lay a condolence card signed by Hunter's colleagues from the insurance company. Next to it was a crumpled handwritten note. "We need to talk. I'll be at your place at 8 L. "Send that to the lab," Nina ordered, "and take pictures of all the photos on the walls, including the ones that are broken." She walked over to the fireplace, where a wedding photo in a silver frame stood. Hunter and Chloe Knight smiled at the camera. A happy couple. At least that's how it seemed at first glance. Mrs. Johnson turned out to be an elderly woman with attentive eyes and a habit of knowing everything about her neighbors. "I always notice what's going on in our street," she said, pouring Nina a cup of tea. "I've seen that truck before. It usually parks around the corner, but yesterday it was right in front of the Knight's house." "Did you see the driver?" "A young black man, tall, well-built. I've seen him a couple of times before. To be honest, it seemed to me that he came when Hunter was at work." Nina raised an eyebrow. "Do you think he had something to do with Mrs. Knight's?" The elderly woman pursed her lips meaningfully. "I'm not one to gossip, Detective, but Chloe has seemed happier lately when Hunter wasn't around. And this young man always brought flowers. White lilies. The same bouquet Nina had noticed at the cemetery in the hands of an unknown man. An hour later, the lab sent the first results. Fingerprints were found on the note, belonging to a certain Leonid Leo Harrison, 30 years old, an employee of Builder's Depot. His fingerprints were also found on the door handle and the broken photo frame. Builder's Depot was located on the outskirts of town, a large warehouse for building materials with an adjoining store. Nina parked at the entrance and headed for the administrator. "Is Leonid Harrison on duty today?" The administrator, a heavy-set, middle-aged woman, nodded. "He's in the lumber section." "Has something happened?" Nina didn't answer, just showed her badge and asked to be shown in. Leo Harrison was exactly as Mrs. Johnson had described him, a tall, athletic man with short dreadlocks. He was stacking boards on a pallet when he saw Nina approaching with 2 police officers. "Leonid Harrison?" Nina asked, showing her badge. "I'm Detective Nina Grace. I need to ask you a few questions about your whereabouts last night." The man's face tensed. His eyes darted toward the exit as if he were assessing his chances of escape. "I didn't do anything," he said, taking a step back. "No one is accusing you of anything, Mr. Harrison. We just want to talk." "Then why did you come with the police?" His voice rose, attracting the attention of other employees. "It's standard procedure. Please come with me." Leo clenched his fists, his breathing quickening. For a second, Nine thought he was going to run, but instead, he shoved a nearby pallet of boards. The wooden planks crashed to the floor, creating chaos and a barrier between him and the cops. But he didn't get far. One of the officers caught him at the exit of the section, knocked him to the floor, handcuffed him, and read him his rights. "I didn't kill him!" Leo shouted as he was led to the police car. "You don't understand!" In the interrogation room at the police station, Leo sat hunched over with his head down. His aggression had given way to apathy, but tension was still evident in his every movement. Nina placed a folder with photographs on the table. "Mr. Harrison, do you know why you're here?" He looked up at her with tired eyes. "Because of Hunter. So you know about his death?" "The whole town knows. News travels fast." Nina opened the folder and laid out a photograph of the broken frame with fingerprints on it. "Your fingerprints were found at the Knight's house. Witnesses saw your truck near their house last night. We found a note written by you asking for a meeting. Do you want to explain what happened?" Leo was silent for a long time, then ran his hand over his face. "I didn't kill him," he finally said quietly. "Yes, I was there yesterday. Yes, we had an argument. But when I left, he was alive." "What did you argue about?" "Chloe, of course. What else?" Nina leaned back in her chair, watching the suspect's reactions closely. "Tell me about your relationship with Chloe Knights." Leo's face softened, and a flash of pain crossed his eyes. "We met 8 months ago. She came to the store for bathroom renovation supplies. I helped her choose some tiles. Then she came back the next day and said she had forgotten to buy grout." He smiled faintly at the memory. "Actually, she came back to see me. She admitted that later. We started dating. At first it was just coffee after work, then it got more serious." "Did you know she was married?" "Of course I did. She didn't hide it. But she also didn't hide the fact that she was unhappy in her marriage." Nina made a note in her notebook. "What exactly did she say about her husband?" Leo pressed his lips together as if to hold back anger. That he controlled her every move. He checked her phone, forbade her to see her friends, dictated how she should dress, and when she tried to stand up to him, he became violent. "Did he hit her?" "He didn't leave any visible marks, but yes. He pushed her, grabbed her arms until they were bruised, and once he hit her head against the wall. She was afraid of him, Detective. Why didn't she leave? Why didn't she go to the police? Have you ever been in that situation? Leo asked bitterly. Hunter was a respected member of the community, an insurance company manager, a church activist. Who would have believed he was a domestic tyrant? Besides, he threatened that if she left, he would ruin her life. But in the end, she decided to leave. Leo nodded. We plan to leave together. I have a cousin in Portland who promised to help with housing and work. Chloe filed for divorce a week before she died. Nina shuddered. A week before she died? Do you think there's a connection? I'm sure there is, Leo said firmly, but I can't prove anything. The official cause of death was heart failure, no signs of violence. What happened last night, Mr. Harrison? Leo took a deep breath. After the funeral, I couldn't calm down, seeing Hunter standing there, accepting condolences, playing the role of the grieving husband. It was unbearable. I wrote him a note, told him we needed to talk. I went to his house around 8. What did you talk about? I wanted to know the truth about Chloe's death. I accused him directly. At first, he denied everything. Then he started blaming me. He said it was my fault she died. The stress of leading a double life, the guilt she felt toward him. Leo clenched his fists. He said terrible things about her, that she was ungrateful, that he gave her everything, and she betrayed him. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed him. He fell onto the table, breaking the frame with their wedding photo. We were yelling at each other. Did you stab him? No! Leo exclaimed. I swear nothing like that happened. Yes, I was angry, but not enough to kill a man. At some point I realized it was pointless and left. He was alive when I left. He stood in the doorway and shouted after me that I would regret my words. Nina stared at him for a long time, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. Where were you after that? Can anyone confirm your alibi? Leo shook his head. I drove to Lake Kerdalen. I sat there in my car looking at the water. No one saw me as far as I know. What time did you get home? Around midnight. Do you have a gun, Mr. Harrison? No. A knife? Maybe a pocket knife or a hunting knife? No, Detective. I didn't kill Hunter Knights. Yes, I hated him for what he did to Chloe. Yes, I wished he would pay for it, but I'm not a murderer. Leo looked up at her, exhausted. I loved Chloe. We were planning to start a new life. All I wanted was to protect her and be with her. Now she's gone and I've lost everything. Why would I kill Hunter? It wouldn't bring her back. Nina closed the folder and stood up. Mr. Harrison, given the evidence and your lack of an alibi, I'm forced to arrest you on suspicion of the murder of Hunter Knights. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, one will be provided for you by the state. Leo lowered his head, his shoulders slumped. I didn't kill him, he whispered. I swear on Chloe's life, I didn't kill him. But Detective Grace had already left the room, leaving him alone with his despair and fear of a future that had suddenly become so uncertain. The morning at the Spokane Valley Police Station began for Nina Grace with a cup of strong coffee and a stack of documents on her desk. Even though the prime suspect was in custody, something was bothering her. Leo Harrison's testimony sounded sincere, especially his account of Hunter's domestic violence. Experience told her that behind the perfect facade of a happy family often lay the most terrible secrets. Nina opened the folder containing the victim's personal information. Hunter Knights, 40 years old, middle manager at Blue Shield Insurance. Impeccable credit history, no problems with the law, active member of the church community. On the surface, a model citizen. Jackson, she said to her young assistant, check all of Chloe Knight's medical records for the last 3 years. Pay particular attention to any injuries or visits to the emergency room. Yes, Detective, Jackson replied, adjusting his glasses. What are we looking for? Confirmation of Harrison's statement about domestic violence. If Hunter really beat his wife, there could be medical records. Nina decided to start with a visit to the Spokane Medical Center where Chloe worked. The modern 4-story building with a glass facade was located in the business district of the city. At the reception desk, she was greeted by the administrator who had taken the place of the deceased. Detective Grace, the director is waiting for you in his office. Dr. Malcolm Richards, a 50-year-old man with graying temples and kind eyes, motioned Nina to a chair across from his desk. A terrible tragedy. He shook his head. First Chloe, now her husband. The whole staff is in shock. Dr. Richards, I'm investigating the murder of Hunter Knight, but I also need information about his wife. What kind of employee was she? One of the best. Punctual, competent, always friendly with the patients. She joined us 5 years ago and quickly became indispensable. Did you notice any changes in her behavior in recent months? Richards thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, yes, there were changes. About 6 months ago, she became more withdrawn and sometimes missed work. Then on the contrary, she seemed to blossom. She smiled more and changed her hairstyle. I chalked it up to normal mood swings. Do you know anything about her relationship with her husband? I only met Hunter Knight a couple of times at corporate events. He seemed like a controlling person. He often called her at work to check if she was there. Once, I witnessed an argument between them in the parking lot. What happened? Chloe was late leaving work, and he was waiting for her in his car. When she came out, he grabbed her arm so hard that she cried out. I was about to intervene, but they drove off. Did you report this to anyone? The doctor looked down, embarrassed. Unfortunately, no. At the time, I decided it wasn't my place. I regret that now. Which of Chloe's co-workers was closest to her? Cecilia Bell, the head nurse. They were friends. If anyone knows the details of Chloe's personal life, it's her. Cecilia Bell was a tall, slender woman of 38 with short hair and attentive dark eyes. She met Nina in the staff lounge, where no one else was present at the time. I was expecting you, she said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Would you like some? Nina nodded. Were you close to Chloe? 15 years of friendship, Cecilia replied quietly. We met in college, then lost touch, and 5 years ago I helped her get a job here. She was like a sister to me. I'm very sorry for your loss, Nina said sincerely. I'm investigating her husband's murder, but I think the key to solving it may lie in their relationship. Cecilia took a sip of coffee, her face tensing. What exactly do you want to know? Anything that might help, especially about how Hunter treated Chloe. The woman was silent for a long time, then placed her cup firmly on the table. Hunter Knight was a monster detective. Behind his perfect facade was a cruel, controlling tyrant. He methodically destroyed Chloe, first emotionally, then physically. Do you have any proof? 3 months ago, Chloe came to my house in the middle of the night with a broken lip and bruises on her ribs. She said she fell down the stairs, but we both knew the truth. I begged her to leave him, to go to the police. She was afraid no one would believe her. Why? Hunter was a master manipulator. Everyone thought he was the perfect husband. Plus, he threatened to ruin her career and spread rumors that she was mentally unstable. 8 months ago, things changed. She met Leo Harrison? Cecilia raised her eyebrows in surprise. You already know? He's in custody, suspected of Hunter's murder. Leo isn't a murderer, Cecilia protested heatedly. He loved Chloe. For the first time in years, I saw her truly happy. They were planning to move away together and start a new life. Did Hunter know about their relationship? He found out about 2 weeks before Chloe died. He somehow intercepted their messages. He made her life hell. He blocked all her credit cards and threatened to take everything in the divorce. But she filed for divorce anyway. It was an incredibly brave thing to do. Nina made a note in her notebook. How did she die? The official cause was heart failure, but Leo hinted that it might not have been an accident. Cecilia paled. I think so too. Chloe didn't have any heart problems. Yes, she had low blood pressure, but nothing serious. Hunter insisted on cremation, and the procedure was carried out very quickly. Too quickly. Do you suspect he might have poisoned her? I can't prove it, but I know they had a fight that day. She called me in tears, saying he had threatened her. 2 hours later, I was told she was dead. Nina felt a chill run down her spine. Why didn't you tell the police about this earlier? To whom, detective? I called the police the same day. The sergeant on duty said they couldn't do anything without evidence. And when the coroner arrived and determined the cause of death was natural, there was no investigation at all. By lunchtime, Jackson had brought a folder containing Chloe Knight's medical records. You were right, detective. Over the past 2 years, there have been 4 visits to the emergency room. A sprained wrist, bruised ribs, a concussion, a cut eyebrow. Every time, domestic violence. A typical pattern for victims of domestic violence, Nina remarked. What about the death report? Here's the interesting part. The coroner ruled the cause of death as acute heart failure, but the toxicology report was limited. Limited? Why? The report says the husband insisted on expediting the procedure for religious reasons. Only a basic screening was performed, which did not reveal the presence of common drugs or alcohol. Nina frowned. What about more specific substances? Plant poisons, for example? That requires special tests, which were not performed. Find out the coroner's name. I need to talk to him. The next stop in the investigation was the insurance company where Hunter worked. The personnel manager, Daniel Foster, nervously fiddled with his tie as he answered Nina's questions. Hunter was one of our best managers. Clients loved him. Colleagues respected him. Of course, he had a strong personality. What do you mean? He was a perfectionist, demanding of himself and those around him. Sometimes this led to conflicts. A couple of times, female employees complained about his inappropriate comments. Sexual harassment? No, nothing like that, Foster hastily objected. It was more that he would make comments about people's appearance or clothing. But we had a talk with him, and the problem was resolved. How would you describe his personality in general? Foster paused. Hunter knew how to charm people when he wanted to, but behind that charm was a tough, sometimes ruthless man. In business, it helped him succeed. In his personal life, I don't know. Did you ever see him with his wife? At company parties, she always kept to herself a little, letting him be the center of attention. I remember at last year's Christmas dinner, she was talking to one of our clients. Hunter just walked over, took her by the arm, and led her away. Quite imperiously, I'd say. When Nina returned to the station, she found Jackson looking agitated. Detective, there's new information from the night's neighbors. Mrs. Parker, who lives 2 houses down, claims that on the day of the funeral, she saw Hunter publicly confronting Leo in the cemetery parking lot. What exactly did she see? Hunter pinned Leo against his car and pointed his finger at his chest. She didn't hear the conversation, but from the look on their faces, she could tell it was extremely unpleasant. Hunter was clearly threatening Leo. This confirms that Hunter knew about the affair. Anything else? Yes, and this is important. Mr. Baker, the neighbor on the right, added to his testimony. On the night of the murder, he heard more than just a loud argument. He claims that Hunter shouted, "You're to blame for her death. Because of you and your affair, she couldn't handle the stress. You killed her with your love." Nina tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. It sounds like Hunter was trying to shift the blame for Chloe's death onto Leo. An interesting psychological move, or an attempt to hide his own guilt. In the holding cell, Leo looked exhausted but calm. He slowly raised his head when Nina entered. "Did you find anything?" "Possibly. Tell me about your meeting with Hunter at the funeral." Leo smiled bitterly. I tried to stay away. I stood by the trees in the distance, just wanting to say goodbye to Chloe. But when everyone left, Hunter came up to me in the parking lot. Somehow he found out about everything. What did he say? That he knew about our affair, that he found messages on her phone after she died. He said it was my fault she died, that the stress of living a double life triggered her heart attack. Did you believe him? No, Chloe was a strong woman, and she was happy with me despite all the complications. I think... Leo paused, searching for the right words. I think he might have done something to her. Why do you think that? She called me that day, a few hours before she died. She said Hunter had found out about the divorce papers. He was furious, threatening her. She was afraid to stay in the house with him and was going to spend the night at a friend's place. That was the last time we spoke. Why didn't you tell me about that before? I told the police, but they dismissed it. They said it was just my imagination because the official cause of death was heart failure. Nina looked closely at Leo, trying to determine if he was telling the truth. What happened when you went to Hunter's house that evening after the funeral? I wanted to know the truth. I asked him straight out what he had done to Chloe. He laughed in my face. He said I would never prove anything. And then he started saying terrible things about her. That she was an unfaithful wife, that she had betrayed him, that she got what she deserved. Leo's eyes filled with tears. I pushed him. He fell onto the table and broke a picture frame. We were yelling at each other. He blamed me for her death. I blamed him. At some point I realized it was pointless and left. I swear he was alive when I left. Do you know if Hunter had any enemies besides you? Leo shook his head. I don't know. Chloe said he was a master manipulator. In public he was charming and generous. In his personal life, he was a completely different person. On the way back to the office, Nina received a call from the lab technicians. Detective Grace, we found something interesting at the crime scene. The nature of the wounds and the blood spatter suggests that Hunter Knights wasn't just defending himself, he attacked the killer. What exactly do you mean? The signs of a struggle and the position of the body indicate that the victim was the aggressor at the beginning of the confrontation. Traces of his blood were found on the fireplace poker, which suggests that he was the first to use it as a weapon against his attacker. The murder may have been committed in self-defense. Interesting, Nina said thoughtfully. That fits with what we've learned about Hunter's character. He could well have provoked the attack. Back at the station, Nina laid out all the evidence and statements on a board. The picture was gradually coming together, but something still bothered her. Her intuition told her that there was something left unsolved in this case. Jackson knocked on the door. Detective, Cecilia Bell from the clinic called. She said she forgot to tell you something important about Chloe and Hunter. She asked you to call her back. Nina picked up the phone and dialed the number. The conversation was brief, but it made her eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Jackson, I need you to check something else. Chloe Knight's insurance policy. Find out who the beneficiary was and for how much. An hour later, they were back in front of the evidence board. $200,000, Jackson said. The policy was taken out on Hunter Knights 2 years ago. In the event of Chloe's death, the entire amount would go to him. That explains a lot, Nina said thoughtfully. Cecilia said that a month before her death, Chloe changed the beneficiary on her policy. Instead of her husband, she named her mother. But Hunter somehow found out and forced her to change it back. Do you think money was the motive? $200,000 is a lot of money, especially for a man who just found out that his wife was planning to leave him and had filed for divorce. And the division of property in a divorce would have deprived him of a significant part of his fortune. But if he killed Chloe for the money, then who killed him? And why now? Nina stared at the photos from Hunter's crime scene for a long time. The killer knew about Chloe and Leo's affair. He knew that Hunter and Leo had had an argument on the evening of the murder, and he probably knew or suspected that Hunter was involved in Chloe's death. The murder looks like an act of revenge. Jackson frowned. If not Leo, then who? Who else cared enough about Chloe to avenge her death? Nina tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. That's what we have to find out. The morning of the third day of the investigation was cloudy. Nina Grace sat in her office, sorting through photos from the crime scene. Something was slipping her mind. Some detail was bothering her. She was looking through the coroner's report for the 100th time when Jackson knocked on the door. Detective, the results of the additional examination of the murder weapon and the nature of the wounds are in. Nina took the folder and quickly scanned the lines. A moment later, she sat up straight in her chair, her gaze focused. The wounds were inflicted with the left hand, she said thoughtfully. And Leo Harrison is right-handed, correct? Absolutely, Jackson nodded. His personal file contains a medical report from sports competitions. He's right-handed, it's on record. Nina rose from the table. I need to talk to Cecilia Bell again, urgently. On the way to the clinic, she mentally reviewed everything she had learned about Chloe's close friend. Cecilia was the only one who knew about the affair with Leo, the only one who had seen Chloe's bruises, the only one Chloe had called on the day she died. At the clinic reception, the nurse informed her that Cecilia had taken the day off. Nina asked for her home address and headed there, feeling her conviction grow stronger with every passing minute. Cecilia lived in a modest apartment on the second floor of a 3-story building in a quiet neighborhood. Nina rang the doorbell and prepared herself for a long wait, but the door opened almost immediately. Cecilia stood in the doorway in her home clothes, her hair damp from the shower. Detective Grace? Her voice sounded surprised but not alarmed. Is something wrong? Can I come in? I have a few questions. Cecilia stepped back silently, letting Nina into the apartment. The small living room was tastefully but modestly furnished. There were photographs on the walls. Nina recognized Chloe in many of them, smiling, lively, happy. You were very close, Nina remarked, pointing to the photographs. 15 years of friendship, Cecilia replied quietly. I knew her better than anyone else. Including Leo? Cecilia hesitated. Leo came into her life recently. He loved her, but he didn't know everything. Everything about what? About Hunter. About what she had to go through. Nina looked closely at the woman in front of her. Cecilia seemed calm, but there was tension in the depths of her eyes. You're left-handed, aren't you? Nina asked suddenly. A momentary confusion flashed across Cecilia's face, quickly replaced by a neutral expression. Yes, why does that matter? Instead of answering, Nina took out a photograph from the crime scene. The expert determined that Hunter's wounds were inflicted by someone holding a knife in their left hand. Leo Harrison is right-handed. Cecilia remained silent, only clenching her hands tighter. I also noticed one detail, Nina continued. There was a broken vase with white lilies at the crime scene. Leo brought the same flowers to Chloe's funeral. They were her favorite flowers, weren't they? Cecilia nodded, her eyes filling with tears. I brought them that evening. I wanted to put them there in her memory. It was the anniversary of our friendship. What happened, Cecilia? Nina asked gently. What happened at Hunter's house? It was as if a dam had burst. Cecilia sank to the sofa, covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. When she raised her head, her eyes were filled with determination mixed with grief. I just wanted to talk to him. After the funeral, I couldn't calm down. All I could think about was Chloe, how she died. She called me that day, Detective. She said Hunter had threatened her, that he had put something in her tea. You think he poisoned her? I'm sure of it. He knew she was leaving. He knew about the divorce, about Leo, about her changing the beneficiary on her insurance policy. He couldn't let that happen. Nina watched Cecilia closely. Why did you go to his house on the day of the funeral? I wanted to hear the truth. I thought maybe in a fit of rage he would slip up. I arrived around 9 in the evening and brought lilies. I was going to leave them on the steps, but I saw that the lights were on in the house. Cecilia sighed deeply, gathering her thoughts. When I pulled up, I saw Leo's truck driving away from the house. I knew they had been talking about Chloe. I knew Hunter would be furious, but I knocked anyway. What happened next? He opened the door, already drunk. He saw the lilies in my hands and laughed. He said, "Another grieving girlfriend. It's too late." I asked him directly what he had done to Chloe, and he didn't deny it. Cecilia's eyes darkened at the memory. She got what she deserved, he said. Did she think she could just walk away from me, take my money, make me a laughingstock in front of everyone? He said terrible things about her, Detective. He called her a whore, a traitor, and then he started accusing Leo. He said he'd have him put away for murder. For your murder? No, for Chloe's murder. He said he had proof that Leo had slipped something into her drink during their last meeting, that he would get the experts to review the results, that he would ruin Leo's life, just like Chloe had ruined his. Nina frowned. And you believed him? He worked for an insurance company, had connections, and he was vindictive enough to do it. I couldn't let him ruin another life. What happened next? Cecilia clenched her fists. I tried to leave. I realized it was pointless, but he grabbed my arm and started yelling. You've always been on her side. You always defended her. Do you think I don't know you talked her into leaving me? Bitterness colored Cecilia's voice. He pushed me. I fell onto the table and broke a vase of lilies. He leaned over me, continuing to shout insults at Chloe. And then he grabbed the fireplace poker. Cecilia fell silent, her eyes clouding over. You defended yourself, Nina said quietly. At first, yes. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a knife that was lying among the broken pieces of the vase. He was so enraged that he didn't notice it right away. He swung the poker, but I managed to dodge it. The knife went into his shoulder. And then he staggered back and dropped the poker. He looked at me with such surprise, as if he couldn't believe I had dared to defend myself. And then he started laughing. He said, Now you're caught too. You'll go to prison for assault, and Leo will go to prison for killing Chloe. Perfect. Cecilia looked up at Nina, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to kill him, Detective, but at that moment I saw that he would never stop. that he would destroy Chloe's memory, ruin her name, and break Leo's life. I couldn't let that happen. You delivered the final blows. That's not a question. It's a statement. Cecilia nodded slowly. It all happened so fast. All I remember is his eyes. First surprised, then scared. And then I was standing over him, and the knife was in my hand, covered in blood. She looked at her hands as if she could still see the blood on them. I knew the police would suspect Leo. The neighbors saw his truck, heard them arguing. I didn't try to frame him on purpose. I just couldn't bring myself to confess right away. Nina stared at the woman in front of her for a long time. Not a murderer by nature, but a defender of her friend who had been pushed to the limit. You understand that you have to come with me to the station and make an official statement? Cecilia nodded, wiping away her tears. I understand, and I'm ready to take responsibility for what I did. Just, can I change first? Nina agreed. Cecilia went into the bedroom, and the detective remained in the living room, looking at the photos on the walls. In one of them, Chloe and Cecilia were standing arm in arm, smiling happily at the camera. In the corner, the date was visible, 15 years ago. Suddenly, Nina frowned, noticing another detail in the photo. She moved closer to make sure she wasn't mistaken. In the photo, Cecilia was holding a camera in her right hand. You're not left-handed, Nina said when Cecilia returned to the living room, having changed her clothes. At least you weren't 15 years ago. Cecilia froze in place. I broke my right arm, she replied quietly after a moment. 10 years ago, I had to learn to do a lot with my left hand. Who broke your arm? Cecilia looked away. My ex-husband. It was the last straw before the divorce. Everything fell into place. Nina understood why Cecilia was so desperate to defend her friend, why she couldn't stay out of it. You went through the same thing as Chloe. Only I managed to get out earlier. Cecilia smiled sadly. I had no children, no shared property. I just left and started a new life. Chloe wasn't so free. Nina nodded toward the front door. Let's go. We have a long conversation ahead of us at the police station. At the police station, Cecilia officially confessed to the murder of Hunter Knights. She described the events of that evening in detail, without trying to downplay her guilt or justify her actions. The only thing she asked for was that Leo Harrison be released immediately. He's innocent, she insisted. He loved Chloe and would never have hurt her. Nina personally escorted Leo from his cell and explained the situation. He was stunned to learn of Cecilia's confession. Why? Was all he could ask. Why did she do it? Out of love for her friend, Nina replied simply. And perhaps out of a sense of justice. Leo asked permission to speak with Cecilia before she was transferred to the county jail. Nina arranged a brief meeting in the interrogation room, watching them through the glass. I didn't know, Leo said, sitting down across from Cecilia. I didn't know you were so close to Chloe. 15 years of friendship, she smiled weakly. We went through a lot together. Do you think Hunter really killed her? I'm sure of it. Chloe didn't have any heart problems, and Hunter had access to various drugs through his connections, something that wasn't detected in the standard analysis. Leo lowered his head, clenching his fists. I should have protected her. I should have taken her away from there sooner. It's not your fault, Cecilia said softly. You gave her 8 months of happiness, 8 months when she felt loved and valued. That's more than she had in 10 years of marriage. They were silent for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. What happens now? Leo finally asked. I'll be tried for murder. Given the circumstances, there may be mitigating factors, but I'm prepared for the consequences. I'll testify on your behalf, Leo said firmly. I'll tell them what Hunter was really like. Cecilia nodded gratefully. You know, she said quietly, Chloe loved you very much. I've never seen her as happy as she was in the last few months. She believed in your future. Leo struggled to hold back his tears. Thank you for telling me that. When the meeting time was up, the officers led Cecilia away. Passing Nina, she stopped. You know, Detective, I don't regret what I did. I only regret that I couldn't save Chloe. Nina nodded understandingly. Sometimes justice comes at a high price. But it's worth it, Cecilia replied quietly. Always. That evening, Nina visited the cemetery where Chloe was buried. The grave was already beginning to be overgrown with grass, but there were fresh flowers on it. White lilies. Nina knew who had brought them. Leo had mentioned that he wanted to say goodbye before leaving for Portland, where he and Chloe had planned to start a new life. The detective stood in silence for a few minutes, thinking about the woman she had never known in life, but whose story had touched her so deeply, about friendship that can transcend all boundaries, about love that came too late, and about justice that always finds its way, no matter how winding it may be. Leaving the cemetery, Nina took one last look at Chloe's grave, at the white lilies gently swaying in the wind. The last flowers for a woman whose death had revealed so many secrets and changed so many lives.